On today's episode, we're going to be talking a little bit about the pain that is involved in difficult life circumstances. And a lot of times when things bad happen, we do have trust in God and we have faith in Him and we believe that He's allowing it for part of His glory, but there's still pain involved. And so we're going to just talk a little bit today about when does the pain go away. Stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. Rusty and Heather Bryant back with you today, and looking forward to sharing with you today a little bit actually of, this is kind of a follow-up, I guess, to last week, but it is a new topic, but it's going to just kind of springboard off of what we talked about last week.
Yeah, and not just following up on what we talked about. This topic is spurred from comments that were made after our podcast last week.
Yeah, so last week we asked the question, why did God not stop the affair? So
Right.
Our story, obviously, Heather confessed to being unfaithful almost 12 years ago. And looking back on it, we've had to sort of digest and struggle through the question of why did God not stop, those circumstances from happening. And, we believe that God is sovereign, and we believe that at any point He could have stepped in and stopped things or orchestrated things differently, but He allowed things to happen. And we've had to go back and try to look at the bigger picture and how was it that God was trying to receive glory through our story and through our circumstances. And so we've had a lot of people that have responded and reached out to us over the week, and they believe that. They know that they are a part of God's plan. They trust God, and they know that God can bring good things through all of the circumstances, but there's still a lot of pain. And so the question becomes, when is this pain going to stop? Like if I believe that God is truly restoring things and is truly redeeming things, surely there's a point when you stop feeling pain because of it.
Right. And then not only that, but we have so many people that say, I'm doing my part. We preach so much that you can't fix your spouse. Mm-hmm. And so, we have people who are like, okay, I'm going to trust that and know that I can't fix them, but I'm doing everything I can for my relationship with the Lord to be right and for my part of the marriage to be right and strong, but there's still pain caused by the other spouse not doing what they're supposed to be doing, holding up their end of the bargain, or just the circumstances that are surrounding them.
Yeah. And another thing that has kind of, given us some insight into this and maybe started us thinking about it a little more was a sermon that we listened to. We both listened to it by Louis Giglio. If you don't ever listen to Passion City Church, if you want a little bit of a reference of some of the stuff we're going to talk about today, July 2nd, 2023 is the date of the sermon. So if you want to go back and listen to that, we would encourage you to do that because it was a great sermon. But it really made us start thinking. And I know for you, Heather, one of the things that you started thinking about was how when we talk about this difficult subject, obviously our point of reference is the affair and the infidelity. But there's so many other things that this applies to. I mean, it's really any painful circumstance in your life.
Yeah. And what made me think about this is I got a sweet message from a friend of ours who was telling us how much they enjoyed our podcast from the week, but they do not have infidelity in their story at all. But she was just explaining how she was able to take what we were talking about and apply it to the situation that they had been through. And there's so many of those situations out there. Theirs happened to be a lot of difficult things happening at one time, like losing a job, losing a parent, moving. All of those things were happening at one time. And, you could go, this can happen. Why did God allow the death of a child? Why did God allow addiction? Why did God allow pornography into marriages? Like, it doesn't just have to be about infidelity. And I feel like our listeners probably, as they were listening, they didn't think, oh, well, we didn't have an affair in our marriage, so I can't,
Right.
What's the word?
Identify
with this. And I think that our listeners are smart enough to go, oh, but it could help in this area. Yeah. But it just was encouraging to me to remember that as we share what God allowed in our marriage and why we think he allowed it in our marriage and what we are learning from that there's so many other instances that you can take and go, okay, well, affair may not be it, but it may be one of these other things, and then many, many more that I haven't said, that could be the same type thing. Like, why did God allow it, and how is he going to use it in my life and in my marriage to make it stronger?
And when we look at that question, I think that like I said in the intro, a lot of people, they do believe that, and they have enough faith where they can look and say, okay, I understand that bad things happen in this world. Sin, Satan, there's evil in the world,
Yeah, we live in a fallen world.
We live in a fallen world, and so bad things are going to happen. And obviously, if God stopped every bad thing from happening, then we wouldn't have free choice. We wouldn't have the ability to choose right and wrong, all that kind of stuff.
We wouldn't have the freedom the choice to worship him.
That's right.
We would just be like
puppets
made to worship him.
Yep.
And even though we are made to worship him, because it's a choice.
That's right.
That worship,
it means something.
It means something.
Yeah, and it means something to him because we choose to worship him.
And if he was going to stop sin, he could have just stopped Eve from eating the apple.
Exactly.
From the very beginning.
And so as people kind of go through the difficult times and they're able to go, okay, yes, I understand that as painful as it was and has been for me, that God can redeem it, he can restore it, and because of that, there can be good. But then it becomes, all right, well, as it's becoming good, and when it becomes, when will I stop hurting from this? And because there's people that are still feeling pain from the death of a loved one, from the loss of a job, from the betrayal of a friend, from infidelity, whatever it is, and it could be years and years later. And I think that people sometimes go, oh my gosh, well, do I really not have faith in this, and am I really not trusting God's plan and the big picture because I have pain, and and the pain hasn't really gone away.
Right.
It may be better, but it's still there, and so people think that there's something wrong with them. And I even think that there's a little bit sometimes that people could listen to us and listen to our story and hear the hope that we give, and the positive energy behind what's happened to us and where we are now and how different our marriage is, and they go, well, that's not me. Like when am I going to get to that point, and when am I going to stop hurting? Because probably when you listen to us, now we're very real and honest, so if you really do listen to us for any amount of time, you're going to know that we still struggle. And so I think that's really the first thing that I want to tell our listeners is, as you're listening to us, you're listening to two humans that still feel pain, and we still have painful moments that we struggle with because of your choices from 12 years ago. And I can even... there were two very specific things that happened this weekend, one yesterday, one today, where and I haven't even told you, I haven't even talked to you about it, and I'm not necessarily going to tell you because that's not where we are in our relationship. Right. I'm able to handle those things, but they still bring up pain. So these two things happen, and I don't know, you want to call them triggers or whatever, but it was just, they were painful reminders, and yeah, it hurt. And I know that we talk about how that hurt is different because now we remember and we look back and we go, man, I'm so thankful that we aren't where we were, but we are where we are today. But that doesn't mean that that pain isn't still there sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, it helps us to remember where we've come from, yes, and remember how far we've come. But it also, I mean, it's just like the tattoo that our oldest son has on his arm that says thankful for the scars, because it's a reminder of who he is and what he's done in our life. So as you have pain, it is a reminder to be able to say to yourself, and a reminder for you to thank God for where he has brought you from, and thank you for him being there, and thanking him for loving you anyway. Like for me, like, yes, those triggers happen to you, and you probably remember pain a lot more than I do, because when those things happen to me, it doesn't just remind me of pain. It tries to put shame and guilt on me. So it's a type of pain, but it's a different kind of pain. And so it's guilt and shame, and it's tempting to go there. But then in the same way, that pain of shame and that pain of guilt reminds me of who Christ is and what he's done in my life. And we've said before, and guys, this is just, I mean, it's something I have to preach to myself, I mean, all the time, like every single day, that if we were okay, if we didn't feel pain, if there weren't those reminders, if that shame and guilt didn't try to rear its ugly head, if we were just fine, we would have no need for Christ. But because of that pain, and because of those triggers, and because of the us looking back or looking at our present circumstance and say, why is this still happening? It reminds us that we can't do it alone. It reminds us of our need for Jesus, for our need for a relationship with him.
Yeah, that's good. I think that just like you said, and we've said it so many times, it's okay to not be okay. That's right. It's just not okay to stay there. And so I like even what Louis said in this sermon this week. He said it's okay to not be okay. But then he said, as long as your story doesn't end with I'm not okay.
That's right.
Because we have a God that is okay. And we have a God that has this bigger story and this bigger plan, and we're just a part of his story, which we might get into a little bit more in just a minute. But going back to just first of all, I want you as a listener, if you are feeling pain, even if it's been time, it's okay. Like it is normal, and it is okay to feel pain. And if you were, look, so many of you have asked, when does it end? And I can't say that it ever ends. I can say that time makes it so much better, and that restoration for whatever your circumstance is, it is a process. No matter what, it's a process. And that process is going to take time. And one of the things that we have to be willing to do is we have to be willing to give God time to continue the restoration process. And it could be that time is just continuing for the rest of your life here on this earth. Now, that doesn't mean that your pain 5 years from now should be the same as your pain from right now, but it also doesn't mean that it's just going to disappear and go away. And the one of the story he really, in the sermon, he really focused on two stories, and I think the one that may have hit me even more than probably the main story he talked about, he talked about the restoration after a famine in the Old Testament. And I don't even remember the exact scripture, but it was when locusts had destroyed everything. And he basically told the Israelites, he said, I'm going to restore everything. And he said, I will repay you for what was lost. And I just think that that's exactly what he does with painful situations. And just like what he did with our marriage, he said, I'm going to restore this. And he did. And he says, I'm going to repay you for what you lost, because we lost a lot. We lost the dream of what we thought our marriage was going to be. We lost the purity of our marriage. That can only come back through redemption in Christ. But we lost a lot of time where we were having to, fight through this and struggle through this. We lost money.
Yeah.
We lost you lost a job. There was so much loss during that period of time. But we also trusted that in God's restoration, that he was going to repay us for what was lost. And the thing about God and his generosity, the repayment is so much greater than what was lost.
That's right.
And so that's what everybody needs to hold out the hope for. Even though the restoration process may be long and you may still be feeling pain, and you may be thinking to yourself, well, right now, what's been restored isn't near as good as what I had before the pain.
That's right.
But the faithfulness of God says, I'm going to repay you over and in abundance of what you had. And that's where we are.
Right.
And that's where we want to be able to be that light and that hope for people to look at and go, okay, yeah, it was awful and there's still pain from that, but the way that God has repaid us for what was lost is just over and over and over above what we had. And so when people come to us and go, oh, there's no way, there's no way that y'all can have a better relationship, or there's no way I would take.
Have people that say that, and it's so hard to you're like, what? First of all, how do you know?
Right. Yeah.
You can't tell me how we're feeling, what our hearts are feel. It may not be their story, but it is our story that we are in such a better place than we were before all of this happened.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of stories, I think that that's a huge part of, what we talked about last week, and just how our stories are made for God to receive glory. And the thing that we don't think about sometimes is that our story is a story of humans. And that's why there's pain, because there's humans involved, there are people involved, there's hurt, there's sin, there's pain, and that's all just wrapped up in our little story.
Right.
And sure, it's a story, and it's real, and it's your story, and everything that you're feeling is so completely validated. It is real. But our story and your story is just a small story inside of God's story. There's this bigger story that we don't see, and we can't see all of the pieces of it, and we're just a part of it. So we have a story, but our story ultimately has a bigger purpose because it's in God's story.
That's right. And, sometimes we may not even see. It's real easy to get wrapped up in our little world. And Penny, my mentor, tells me all the time, you got to zoom out. You got to pull back and look at the bigger picture and know that there's more than just you. And even our little family, our marriage and our family, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Last night we were at a ball game, and someone was talking to me during the rain delay, and she was telling me just how much our podcast had meant to her, and that she had sent it to some friends. Well, one of her friends out of, from where they moved from had a similar story to us. But the husband was not a believer at all. Like he had, like from the time they got married, she knew he wasn't a believer. And he ended up being unfaithful to her. He had an affair. And when he confessed to her, she was able to say, like, I want to fight for our marriage and I forgive you and I want to move forward. I want us to move past this. And he said, how can you do that? Like, if roles were reversed, I wouldn't take you back. And she said, because I've been forgiven by the blood of Jesus and I'm a Christian, and because I have been forgiven, I can't help but offer that forgiveness to you. And he said, I want to know that Jesus. And so, like, he became a Christian through the infidelity in their marriage. And then that changed the trajectory of their family because they had children that then were brought into the faith. And so, like, that one little story of in their marriage was used so powerfully in his life to become a Christian, and then in their kids' lives and their family's life, and all of, like, it's just a ripple effect of redemption. And that goes beautifully with what you were just saying about how he repays, it's restoration, but he repays us in that. And she said, my friend last night when we were talking said, would you do that again? And she said, for him to be saved, I would walk through it again. But that's God's plan. I mean, that's God's picture. That's his picture and his story, part of his story, and not just ours.
Well, there's a lot of people out there too that when they hear that, they think to themselves, no way. Like, there's no way I'm doing that. And, I'm not going to go through the pain of this for you to be fixed. And
which is exactly what Jesus did on the cross for us.
Yeah. And I don't know how else to say. And again, there is a part of me that just wants to say that's selfish. And
you don't hope for it.
No. And it's not, and I'm not saying to the person out there that's going, I'm in the middle of this, and even though there's something good happening to my spouse through this, why in the world am I the one that's having to go through this? And so that part of it, like, I don't want to say, oh, you're being selfish, because nobody is like, hey, I'll take it. I'll take it. Let's have this. The worst of the worst can happen, and I can. It's not that at all. But when those things happen, that's when your whole perspective has to change on it. And you have to start looking at it as this is God's story. And I'm just in the middle of his story. And whether it's good or bad, the ultimate value, meaning, and purpose is really for God's story that's going on around my story. And when you can start looking at it that way, you can accept the pain a little bit easier, and you can deal with the pain when it comes. And look, if you are, to answer that question, when does the pain ever stop? I mean, even though I've had a couple of things happen this weekend that I've thought, that have kind of made the pain surface again, I didn't dwell in it, and I can't even say really with words that it was painful.
Right.
So, yes, over time and just maturity and growing, and
it's more of a reminder.
Yeah, but I do have to say that there's a little bit of pain there. And probably if I dwelled on it, and even if I were to say to you, like, hey, you understand what just happened, and then it reminds you, and then it becomes painful for you, and then it's painful for both of us. And so we've just sort of learned how to control and handle all of that. And so yeah, those people out there, I can't put a time frame on how long the pain's going to last. A lot of it just has to do with your heart.
Sure.
And, again, I'm not saying something's wrong with your heart for feeling the pain, but at some point you do have to just learn how to take care and manage your heart. And over time, yes, the pain is less and it's not as painful, not as severe. And then you get to a point where you go, well, gosh, what I've been repaid is way bigger than what happened and what might pop up from time to time and be painful.
That's right. If you're in that situation where you're thinking, I'm the only one doing the work, you're listening to this podcast and you're like, I'm doing the work, I'm doing my part, my spouse is not. And we've said a million times, you can't fix them, but in the waiting, you have to know that it's part of God's story. It's part of Him working on your spouse. It's part of, and you just pray like a crazy person that God will break them, that God will bring your spouse to the bottom of themselves so that they see their need for Jesus. And in that, your marriage can be helped and your marriage can be saved.
The last thing, we talked about that it is a process. Restoration is a process, and the process takes time, and it's okay to allow. I was just talking to a friend yesterday at the game, and he was talking about the season of life that he's in and how it's difficult, but he knows that it's a process that as painful as it is, he has to sit in it and work through all the pain, because if he just blows on past it, he's going to miss what God's trying to teach him through all of this. And so in the same way, if you're going through anything that's requiring some sort of restoration or new growth on your part, it takes time. When a vineyard is planted, we heard the illustration that a vine from a vineyard, it takes up to 2 years or more to create grapes or create wine. And so there's all these little steps along the way, and if you know that it's going to take time, the person that owns the vineyard, if they know that it's going to take time and they don't rush the process, then all of a sudden every little step along the way becomes excitement. The first time they see greenery, it's like, hey, it's That's working. Right. And then they see a leaf, and it's like, and imagine the first,
those.
Yes, your joy, and you celebrate the little things because you know that you're trying to get through this process to get to an end goal.
That's right.
And, can you imagine? We have nothing to do with vineyards, but I bet the first time they see a grape on the vine, it's like, and it's not ready. But the first time they see a grape on the vine, they're not ripe or anything, not going to make wine yet. They're not making any money for them. But that's got to be exciting just to know it's another step in the process, and still going to take time, but it's one more thing that you can celebrate and be joyful about. And so as you're experiencing whatever you're experiencing to go through the restoration process, like, be joyful for all those little steps along the way and celebrate them.
That's
and
right.
There may be steps back. Every vine in a vineyard does not go from point A to point B with no problems. They're dealing with weather, they're dealing with insects, all kinds of things that can go wrong, and they're constantly having to prune and take care of things along the way, and it's hard work. Nobody just plants it and is like, I'm coming back in 2 years and I'm going to make some wine. It's all there's so much involved in it, but it's such a beautiful process that people that are in that world can really appreciate it. And so do the same for your restoration journey. Take those little steps along the way and celebrate them and be joyful, and know that there's going to be hard days that you're still going to have to work really hard at. But at the end, there is the repayment that God has promised, and it's going to be better than what you went through.
It's a good word.
All right. Well, let's shut her down for the day. Hey, thanks for listening to us. We appreciate all of you. If you get a chance, be sure to like or subscribe or whatever you do on your podcast platform, and leave us a rating and review if you can. That helps us a lot and helps us to get our message out to more people. So we'll see you guys next week.